Acting President George, fellow Rotarians and guests, it is my pleasure this afternoon to introduce to you the principal of St Girls School, Julia Shea. Julia was educated in Tasmania and she graduated in mathematics. She then transferred to Sydney, where she had appointments in 2 schools. One of those schools was the Sydney Grammar School, and the other was the Newington College, where she was appointed deputy head. Actually, Newington has a special meaning to me because 2 of my grandsons attended that school. She later transferred to Adelaide and accepted the position of principal of St Peter's Girls' School. I now ask Julia to address you, and the topic of her address is 5 challenges facing independent schools. Thank you, Julia.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to come and speak to you this afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about 5 challenges that are currently facing independent schools. Those challenges are based around staffing, affordability, what I've termed the school-parent partnership, technology, and the Asian century. In terms of staffing, some recent research by John Hattie again points to the fact that the most powerful in-school determinant of academic outcomes is in fact the quality of the teacher. As a school, we can't control other predictors, such as socio-economic background, but of all the factors that we can control, this is certainly the most important. Steve Biddulph, another researcher, has stated, students learn teachers and not their subjects. Now, I stand in front of you today with over 25 years' experience in education, and I've seen firsthand the primacy of relationships in students' learning. I've dealt with teaching staff that are highly qualified in their subject areas and those with a great work ethic. But if that connection with the girls, in our case, isn't there, they're ineffective in the classroom. So when I talk to new teachers, I always tell them that the most important thing is to remember that idea of relational teaching. They need to know a list of stories, not just a list of names. The challenge is to find staff with that connection. I'll talk briefly about those challenges in view of attraction, retention, and then the development of those staff. Difficult to staff subject areas include subjects such as mathematics and physics. A survey a couple of years ago indicated that only 20% of those teaching senior physics had actually majored in physics at university. High-level maths teachers, high-level physics teachers are incredibly hard to find. There is no doubt that in 10 to 15 years' time, that job will be even more difficult. In recent times, I've had to look to recruit staff from overseas. The most recent physics and mathematics teachers that I've employed have come through the Times Educational Supplement and have come out of England. It's not just about attracting those teachers, it's about creating the right jobs and finding the right people. It's not just about teaching positions these days. Most schools these days have HR executives, they have e-learning coordinators. These jobs did not exist in schools 10 or 15 years ago. My job is to preempt the next sort of job that will be needed to keep our schools moving in the right direction. In terms of support staff, administrative and support personnel play crucial roles in helping students to learn and enabling and facilitating an environment that favours learning. There has been a significant increase in non-teaching staff in recent years. It's a tricky balance, that balance of experience and youth. It's a little bit like the Geelong Football Club, where they're weighing up Kelly and Johnson and Bartell and they've got all the new young guns coming through at the other end. We need that balance of youth and experience. When it comes to youth, the issue is that between 25 and 40% of graduates leave the profession within the first 5 years. That percentage varies depending upon the state that you are in Australia. It is higher in New South Wales than any other state. In terms of the experienced staff, we also have a problem. Half of the men teaching maths are currently over 50. Almost 3/4 of physics teachers are male, with 40% also aged over 50. My children are currently in high school. I think they'll get through. They will be taught by qualified physics and maths teachers. I'm not sure what experience my grandchildren will have. This is one of my favourite quotes. It's from William Ayres out of his book, To Teach, The Journey of a Teacher. Becoming a wonderful teacher, or a great, awesome teacher, as the students tend to call it, is a lifelong affair. This is because good teaching is forever pursuing better teaching. It is always dynamic and in motion, always growing, learning, developing, searching for a better way. Teaching is never finished, never still, never easily summed up. Good teachers, then, are what they are not yet. And so the first and firmest rule is to reach. So the challenge there is for me as a principal to make sure I provide the professional development necessary for teachers to actually model lifelong learning. Things have changed since we were at school. I have 2 questions for all of my staff. The first is, what type of thinking do you value and want to promote in your classroom? And the second one is, if I look into your classroom, what story does it tell? The diagram I've put up there in essence translates our academic strategic plan into a set of learning outcomes, or what we've termed core values for the 21st century. These are the attributes and descriptors that define the type of learner that St Girls would hope to develop through its programs. Things have changed. I had to go to school to learn how to solve quadratic equations. It was the only place I could go to find out. That's not the case anymore. You can log on to the Khan Academy, and yes, it will come out with an American accent, but there will be someone there that will teach you to solve quadratic equations. It's no longer about acquiring knowledge. It's about using that knowledge. It's about being a self-directed learner and having a level of independence and initiative to forge your own educational path. I want our girls to be inquisitive. That's more than acquiring knowledge. It's about actively seeking knowledge. It's about reinventing that knowledge, reinterpreting that knowledge, reimagining that knowledge. And people these days keep talking about independence. We want our students to be independent. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think our girls need to make a journey from dependence to independence, but then back to interdependence. It's about working with others. And finally, about being reflective, looking at their place in the world. We don't model that particularly well. How many of you take time out of your day to reflect on what you've achieved, to look at your strengths and weaknesses, and then find a path forwards? So what are the strategies for these difficult to staff areas? It's about the advertising and selection process. It's about setting up internships with universities to make sure that we get the best possible graduates. The issue is that maths graduates particularly are not going into teaching. We're getting generalists. We're not getting people like myself who majored in pure and applied maths and then chose to go into education. Financially, it wasn't my best choice, but at the end of the day, it's a job that I love and I treasure. What can we do to make more people see the benefit of a career in education? The issue is that university education courses have not equipped these students with strategies to deal with the complex interpersonal demands of the job, hence the huge dropout rate in the early years. We as a school need to provide a supportive collegial community develop leadership and growth opportunities for these young graduates so they actually see a career planned out in front of them. Moving on to affordability, and this is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. When the previous Labor federal government was in power, they negotiated a deal with the then Labor state government about the Gonski Review. That was a 6-year agreement. The Liberals then came in to federal power, and that 6-year agreement has been cut back to a 4-year agreement. Now, all of the states negotiated their agreements separately. At the end of the 6 years, all of the states were going to come out in the same place. Their funding just progressed at a different rate. The deal for South Australia was heavily back-ended, meaning that the majority of our funding was actually coming in the last 2 years of that 6-year deal. That deal is now going to be cut short at the end of 4 years, which means that South Australian schools will be the worst funded in the nation. Figures released by the Association of Independent Schools showing a comparison of funding per student in an independent school in New South Wales against a similar independent school in South Australia indicate that each New South Wales student will receive about $4,000 more than a South Australian student over the next 4 years. Dependent upon exact enrolment numbers, a school similar to Saints Girls in New South Wales will receive approximately an additional $2.5 million in funding over this time frame. Clearly, this has a significant impact on a school's ability to increase staffing for specialist programs and to upgrade facilities. Why is it that in moving my 3 daughters from New South Wales to South Australia, they're suddenly worth less? School-parent partnership. A couple of questions up there for you. There's a lot of debate about the current generation of parents. Are we in danger of raising a marshmallow generation? We are seeing parents that are hesitant to set limits and boundaries and enforce consequences. They see that to be the role of the school. Almost a pathological desire to protect their children from disappointment and failure. The old everyone needs to win a prize scenario. Michael Carr-Gregg, who has quite a high media image, and you may well have seen him on The Breakfast Show, has stated, the result will be a generation of young people incapable of assuming adult responsibility, with no idea how to handle the routine challenges of life, making them risk-averse, psychologically anemic, and riddled with fragility and anxiety. That's probably a little bit harsh, but 2 of my own observations. I have 3 daughters that are teenagers. There is definitely an attitude of self-entitlement, a lack of responsibility, almost as if they can press the undo button and go back and take away their mistakes, and a very real lack of resilience. So the challenge for us as a school, where do we draw the line? Where does our responsibility end and parent responsibility kick in? There are numerous problems around the mental health area. 75% of all mental health problems in human beings begin prior to the age of 25. Some alarming research that was released only last week. Of older girls aged 16 to 17, 23% have reported engaging in self-harm and 20% meeting the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder. These are problems that we as a school need to deal with. And sadly, girls are much more likely than boys to have ever self-harmed. 23% of girls versus 9% of boys in that 16 to 17-year-old age group. We also need to put support around families. Families are as diverse as students. Our parents need to feel safe and supported, and they need to know firsthand what we are trying to do at school so that they can back that up at home. So the challenge for us as a school is to communicate our pastoral care program to parents so that it can be reinforced at home. The question is, what does that pastoral care program look like? I'm a great believer that some of these attributes can be explicitly taught. Quality teaching that explicitly addresses human and social values creates not only happier and more pro-social learners, but also better learners. There is much research out there to show that if our girls are happy, they will learn better, their academic outcomes will be better as a consequence. So we must support the wellbeing of our students, staff and parents and make sure that we have the structures and programs in place in order to achieve that aim. We talk about mental fitness, about strength, endurance and flexibility. Skills of wellbeing can be taught explicitly, just like teaching numeracy and literacy. We can teach our girls to have a positive mindset. Schools these days are assessing what's called a grit score, assessing character traits such as resilience, self-control and persistence, and actually measuring those. Research shows that traits such as those may matter more to academic performance than native intelligence. This is a new area for staff and schools. There needs to be considerable professional development around this area, and the area of learning analytics needs to move beyond just academic performance. My fourth challenge is based around technology. Certainly the technological world thrives on its diversity, its phenomenal growth and its constant thirst for change. The problem for us is that teachers are continuously flooded with a deluge of the latest devices, software, apps and clouds. Even the best schools at using technology are at least a year out of date. How do we as a school deal with that? Yesterday we were fortunate at Saints Girls to have the 7:30 report in, doing a story on a robot that we're using for some coding in one of our reception classes. I'd encourage you to keep your eye out for the 7:30 report in the days to come. For students, the technological issues are around information fluency. It's about actually locating and evaluating and critically looking at the information that they have found. Just because it came up on Google doesn't make it right. But how do they actually work out what they can rely on and what information is not correct? It's about digital fluency, using the tools and technologies in learning and in the information process. There's an assumption that this generation does that really, really well. It's not true. They can text, they can take photos, they're outstanding at putting together iMovies. Put an Excel spreadsheet in front of them and they have absolutely no idea. The digital fluency is not strong. And then, of course, digital citizenship. To actually use those things ethically. We only need to move into the world of social media to see that we have some issues. And my fifth challenge is based around the Asian influence. Too often globalisation is seen in pragmatic economic terms. However, the boom in Asia is not just about business and manufacturing, it's about education and knowledge. There is a rapid and deliberate transformation of schools and universities going on right across the continent, from Mumbai to Shanghai. In China, more than the entire population of Australia is attending university on any given day. There is a profound shift in the world's centre of intellectual gravity. By 2020, 1/3 of the world's university graduates will come from China alone. How do we as a school react to those statistics? We need to take a truly global perspective. We need to engage our student, staff and parents with the Asian culture. In meaningful real-life projects, it's more than learning a language. As an example, again, the former federal Labor government allocated $2.8 million over 4 years to the enhancement of Asian literacy and the employment of Asian language teachers at school level across the entire country. I took that $2.8 million, divided it by the number of schools, and worked out that we would get $70. A challenge. So my 5 challenges for independent schools: staffing, affordability, technology, the school-parent partnership and the Asian century. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Julia, for that. Now, do we have any questions from members? Yes, John.
Finding maths and science teachers difficult, you said, actually, a lot of applicants from the UK. Why is that? Do they turn out more of those than with it?
No, it's predominantly a lifestyle choice. They actually just want to move for the weather. If I'm perfectly honest, it's a lifestyle choice for them. They just want to be out of London and into Australia. Right. So it's something that we take advantage of. The issue is that the visa regulations have been tightened somewhat. We now need to be able to actually show that we weren't able to find someone in Australia with those qualifications before we can actually appoint someone from England. So they're making it a little bit more difficult for us. But for me, it's about the quality of the teacher. And certainly in senior programs, I'm a firm believer that if you haven't done that subject to at least second year university level, you are going to struggle to teach that and extend our incredibly bright girls in that subject area.
Thank you. Next question. Yes.
It may seem a facile question, but does the self-harm, etc., include tattooing?
No. Hear the question, yeah.
Sorry, no, these are girls that are actually trying to hurt themselves, sadly, yep.
Yeah. Yes, Ollie, yep.
Thank you very much. That was tremendously enlightening and very good to listen to. The thing that concerns me, about, you say 4 or 5 of the maths and physics teachers leave the schools after a very short period of time, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I don't know about the pay systems in private schools, but in the public schools, I understand that if you're a teacher, you get a certain amount of money and that's it. Now, will there ever come a time when people who could make a bigger quid out in the real world with their maths and science, physics type qualifications, will they all actually be paid more than the rest?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was about whether or not teachers in those difficult to staff areas could possibly be paid more than other teachers. I guess in an independent school as principal, I can do whatever I like. It would create a few issues if word of that were to get out. But I think eventually demand and supply will come into play, very much so. At the moment, the new AITSL standards, which are the national standards for teachers, are looking to reward outstanding teachers, no matter what subject area they are in, by putting them through a higher level of accreditation. I think that is a step in the right direction. But in order to be an outstanding teacher, you need to have outstanding subject knowledge. And that's where we're falling short.
Next question. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, right. Oh, yes.
Thank you for your talk today. I'm just wondering, one of your main points is these parent and school relationship. I'm wondering what forums you have for parents to voice their views or for you to communicate your concerns to the parent back to you.
Yeah, okay. So that would be different within every independent school, so I can simply talk about Saints Girls there. So we have a lot of involvement with our Parents and Friends Committee, with our Mothers Group. I frequently call in focus groups. So for instance, our parents that just recently moved from our E or C up to our reception class, in terms of that transition, I called in a focus group to have a chat and get some feedback on how we handled that. We're about to go through our next strategic planning exercise, so I will call in groups based around all of those core areas to look at our academic programs, co-curricular programs and all of those things. Our parents are very much a partner in the product that we provide. So that feedback is incredibly important, and I guess I see it as being one of the main things that I need to do, to be out there constantly communicating and getting that feedback in order to improve. It goes back to that reflection statement. If I as a principal don't take time to reflect on the programs we have in place and get feedback from outside of my office, I'm not going to know how to improve them.
Right. Any further questions? Yes, one down there. Howard, yeah.
Given that you're looking for
What's the question?
So the question was, given that it's not so much content-based anymore, it's about what's the importance of curriculum per se. Is that correct? Yeah. So I guess my answer to that would be, and as I said, knowledge these days is readily available, but the skills to be able to use that knowledge still need to be explicitly taught. And at the end of the day, we need to light the passion for our girls to actually pursue that knowledge. So I'm a firm believer in that the quality teacher will be the one that will actually light that spark. So in terms of science teaching, if you have a great science teacher and we put you in the science lab and do some wonderful things, that's going to make you go out and pursue that knowledge later on. So we are the ones that provide the spark for the learning. So our role has changed. We are not giving out knowledge per se anymore. We are facilitating the girls in moving down their own educational path.
I think we have time for, time for one more question. Do we have any more? Right down the back there, yeah.
Do you believe that Facebook is a positive or negative influence on children's learning?
That's a question.
We have a social media policy where none of our staff are on Facebook with any of our students. Facebook is not accessible to our girls at school. And I guess that comes to that question of where you draw the line between the school and parenting. The issue is that Facebook should not be accessible to any student under the age of 13. Sadly, that is not the case. So we can't control what goes on at home. We can certainly strongly advise, but we run numerous sessions with our girls and our parents around that IT side of things, and we need the parents to come on board with us, and I'm glad to say that at Saints Girls the majority do.
Thank you indeed, Julia, for that. And now I'll ask members to thank you with acclamation whilst I make a small presentation. Thanks, Julia. That's a small memento. Yeah, right.